Lights up!
Welcome to Lights Up, Putney Theatre Company's podcast, where we discuss all our shows, news, views and general chit-chat about all things theatre.
This week we feature a wide-ranging discussion prompted by themes of the new Putney Theatre Company production of Kindertransport, a complex, challenging and powerful drama. It's an absolute must-see. So we're gathered here today to talk about Kindertransport, which is a new production at the Putney Theatre Company in the studio, coming up soon in February. We'll give you the dates right at the end. And I'm joined here by three very important people for the production. Perhaps you'd like to introduce yourselves.
I'm Diane Denton-Baker, and I'm the director.
And I'm Lil, the mother who takes in the child.
And I'm Sarah Jillings. I am acting as historical advisor.
Excellent. So I wondered, Diane, if you could give us a synopsis of the play to tell us what's really going on.
Right, well, it's about the Kindertransport scheme, which brought about 10,000 children to England from Germany just before the war, 1938, I think it was. They were sent by their parents to escape Hitler's regime, and sadly, a lot of them never saw their parents again. This is a story about Eva, a young Jewish girl, who's sent to England by her parents and adopted by Lil and her family, and how difficult she finds it to settle in to a new environment. Running concurrently in the play is it interweaves between the past and the present. Her older self calls herself Evelyn, and she goes into their storage room to give Faith, her daughter, some things because she's going off to live on her own. And the daughter finds papers and documents that show that her mother probably came over on the Kindertransport scheme but never ever mentioned it. And she confronts her mother about this. And this is where the story gets interesting, because her mother has hidden her past and is very traumatised by it.
So, Carol.
And it's a fascinating story, really, because you've got the mother-daughter relationship, all the emotions. Also, Faith, who's the daughter of Evelyn, who was originally Eva but changed her name to Evelyn. She's a single parent as well. Her marriage is obviously broken down. And so you've got all the different emotions coming through, as well as survivor guilt and not knowing where her parents were. And I think she does worry about her mother, but she's tried to put that behind her. And my character, Lil, she's actually over-mothering in a way. I've got my own two daughters, Margaret and Nora. Well, poor old Margaret and Nora have to play second fiddle to this evacuee. So there are all those dynamics going on in the play, which makes it quite interesting.
Yeah, so there are lots of layers of truth.
Yes, that's
so
right.
from a historical point of view, then how have you...
Yeah, it was written in about 1990, the play, and it calls on a lot of different elements of the stories that you read about children who came as kinder. So the Kindertransport started after the pogrom of 1938, 9th of November, Kristallnacht, when it really became apparent that things were going downhill very rapidly for Jews in Germany and Austria and Prague, Czechoslovakia also, as Hitler took over different places. So it illustrates a lot of the different dimensions of that experience. The children who came in the Kindertransport, about 10,000 in all, came as unaccompanied child refugees. There was no right of refuge in the 1930s, and their parents had no legal means to get into the country. So what you've got is parents sending their children away because they want to make sure their children have a future, because they cannot find a way to get out as a family. And you see that in the play. And one of the things that's so powerful about it is you're seeing that historical narrative weave through the script as it's written. At one point, Eva is trying to get her parents out, and the most common way in which people were able to escape was to be on a domestic servant's visa. This is middle class sort of Jewish German Jews who had servants themselves suddenly offering themselves to be cooks and gardeners and chauffeurs as a way to get out. And you would see in the Jewish Chronicle, the community newspaper, desperate adverts looking for, saying, please offer me an opportunity. And of course, it's the 1930s. A lot of people haven't got a lot of money to spare. There's a lot of suspicion. So there's so many different historical elements and very accurate kind of psychological truths weaved into this really beautiful piece of theatre.
So it feels like a very important piece of theatre to make sure that people don't forget. Because with things like Windrush as well, these things sort of fade into history, and we as a society deal with consequences without really understanding the depth of what's going on. So that must have been a challenge to bring that to bear.
This is a challenge of a play, I think. But of course, Kindertransport has been very much in the news lately.
I did know someone who. Well, I don't know whether they came over in the Kindertransport, but I recently learnt that this woman and her husband came as servants. Now, they were actually very educated people, and they'd come from Vienna.
Well, in the play, of course, the scene you have with Eva saying, we must advertise for jobs for your parents, and she says, they're not servants.
Yes.
And doesn't realise that the only way, until Lil tells her, that they can come to England is as servants. Yeah. Which is very sad.
And is the fate of many refugees.
Yeah.
Doctors coming from India and from Afghanistan and so on.
Yeah. Everything that you had and the life you had is taken away from you, and you have to find a way to start again. And again, what the Kindertransport tells us is about that particular historical episode, about the broader dimensions of the Holocaust as a whole, but also the experience of a refugee, and those experiences of refugees resonate down the years, unfortunately, and many of the issues raised about how do you accommodate those choices you have to make, the compromise you have to make are absolutely what refugees are experiencing today. So it is both particular in its historical narrative, but it is universal in the kind of stories it's telling. And as Carol says, it's also about mothers and daughters and preparing your child to leave.
Yes.
And there's also this child has been sent over on the Kindertransport, comes here, and then of course is trying to be evacuated and gets very upset naturally, because I think she's thinking back to having been put on a train before.
Yes.
And so she jumps off the train, really.
Yeah, well,
and I, as her foster mother, realise actually it isn't right to send her off as an evacuee, even though all the other children and my own children are quite happily, I think, going off as evacuees. It isn't the right thing to do to this child who's already been evacuated from her family and
had a very traumatic journey.
Yes,
as well.
Devastating choices for all the parents.
Yeah.
And all the children were sent by train, and they had to cross the border into Holland. And when they crossed the border into Holland, there was this sort of sense of relief because they'd escaped the Nazis, and then they went across Holland by train, and then they were evacuated via Harwich Hook of Holland ferry, and most children arrived in Harwich and then onto Liverpool Street Station. And if you're interested, you can sort of see there's various places that you can see both Harwich and Liverpool Street. There are statues to sort of commemorate and remember these children coming in, and they arrived with nothing really. They were not allowed to take anything with them of any value, so they, it's the proverbial you come with nothing and you have to start again.
Yes.
So how did you tackle it from a performance point of view? Because these are very complex issues.
I think the difficult part was weaving the past and the present together, and to make it believable to the audience. The blocking of the play was quite difficult, particularly in the small studio space.
But it's going to make it very powerful, isn't it?
Yes,
the intimacy
but
of
actually,
that.
In a small space, which is quite claustrophobic, it's quite good.
Gets
the
condenses
everything,
together, doesn't it?
And it's not a naturalistic play, but of course there are natural elements in it as well. I think it's a very interesting play, and the more I've got into it, and as I've said in the programme notes, that the cast have all been very interested in the subject, instead of coming in and talking about gossip or what they did last night. Well, they do that as well, but they often talk about the Holocaust, and they know somebody who knows somebody, and they've taken a real interest.
So I think it's interesting that who made the decision to have a historical advisor?
Yes, we did, because Sarah's been working at the Jewish Museum for many years, and none of us know much about
Well, it's a
about the
sensitivity
customs
issue as
and-
well.
Yeah,
isn't it?
it's
How to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm a former curator at the Jewish Museum, and I spent a lot of time working with these kind of issues, and we had a remarkable Holocaust education program. So it's something, even though I no longer work in that sector, I think is really important. And I've always, I always sort of thought, oh, we should do Kindertransport as a play at Putney. It's a great piece of theatre. And so when Diana said she was doing it, I was very happy to offer my involvement and just and just be there if people had questions to ask. And it is exactly that. It's sensitivity. It's about getting some of those little elements right, but also it's always the balance between the specific and the general. It's telling us bigger truths around history that are still relevant today, but it's so difficult to get right, so you don't kind of make equivalences that are inappropriate. The experience of refugee is both universal and particular, so you've got to find a way of doing both of those things at once. And I think it's such a good piece of writing. I was saying that to the actors in the rehearsal, like, trust the writing. It's very accurate, and they're not easy characters, are they?
It is based on a true story, I think. And
Yes.
I've always worked actually with Jewish bosses, so quite often the people I work with now are adding their two penneth and saying, "Oh yes," and then we're quite near the synagogue in Wimbledon, so we've got lots of people pop in with little stories for us.
Oh, do they?
Yes,
That's
it's quite
interesting.
interesting.
Yes. But it was interesting to see on the BBC the other night. They were interviewing one of the very few survivors, and he was worried that it would all be forgotten, and it would be just a footnote in history.
Yes,
So it's good to try and
Keep us
revive it and
alive,
keep people thinking about what awful things happened, really.
Yeah. And that's where a play like Kindertransport is great, because we are passing from that period of history where you can that's what a lot of Holocaust education has been built on, that personal testimony. So obviously there's been a lot of things to record people's stories and present them through film and things, but the experience of listening to someone in a room tell you about what happened to them as a child is incredibly powerful, and we'll never be able to do that again once that generation is no longer with us. But I think that's where art, as a response to it, can kind of help us keep that kind of emotional engagement and truth alive. I think that's why it's such a great piece of theatre, because it has that emotional truth to it, and that people had to make terrible accommodations to survive. And
so because humanity isn't about binary choices.
No.
As a parent, you make difficult choices all the time. In this circumstance, it's not even your own child. They've already gone through a terrible trauma, so there are so many layers of wrong.
Yes.
So how do you comfort? How do you move forward?
And I think the Jewish community do keep these things alive. I mean, when they have the Friday nights and the Seder and everything, they rehearse the whole thing about the journey out of. You know about that, aren't you?
Yeah, the Passover Seder that features in the play, and the story that's told on Passover is the story of Exodus and the saving of the Jews from Egypt, and again, it's a very powerful narrative for many Jewish families, because, and again, it says in the play, this isn't just a sort of historical, mythical kind of past. This is kept alive for each and every generation.
And it has to be the youngest child who has to tell the story.
And that's the pain again. The youngest child has gone away, so
But it's teaching and keeping that alive.
And the history of Jewish people is in many cases a history of Exodus and what do you have to do to survive. And so that's why I think why Passover resonates with so many people, that sort of story of being saved and liberation, and it's so, and again at the end of the war when people liberated from the camps, they had a Seder service in the camps, and remembering, and the lines in the Seder are so powerful then in that circumstance, given what people have been through. So
Terrifying but fascinating. So is there anything else you think we should be saying? Perhaps what about other members of the cast? How did the casting go?
It was quite difficult, actually. And
Great cast.
And I think we've got a very good cast. And they all seem very keen.
And sort of interested in finding out.
Yes.
How many in the cast?
6.
Perhaps you could run through them for me.
Oh, well, there's Carol as Lil. She has one of the biggest parts, and she has to play the foster mother, but she also has to play the foster mother when she's 40 in 1938 and when she's about 80 in 1980. And then there's the young girl herself. Ilona plays her. She's not a young child, but she's a young woman. You don't really get the feeling that she's that traumatised as when she comes over. She seems to quite enjoy. Of course, she's desperate for her parents to join her, and she realises that they can't in the end. But
And she is supposed to be 9 years old.
she is meant to be 9. But
Yeah.
yes, you have to. Yes, a bit of
Suspend this.
poetic license.
Not
Yeah.
naturalistic. Not
Yeah.
naturalistic.
You did say that.
But it would be very difficult to get a 9-year-old girl to do
And
such a difficult
she's
part.
ageing at different points
Yes,
of the play.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, she does.
And then there's Evelyn, who is Eva when she's older. You realise that she's really repressed and doesn't hidden all her past from her daughter, and that is why her daughter gets very upset that she was never told about her mother. And then there's Will, who's the rat catcher, but he also plays the postman and the Nazi official and the
guard.
guard and various
the grim
different
jobs.
parts. And then there's Faith,
Faith,
the daughter, who, well, she's very good, isn't she?
Yes, she's
Yes.
great. But she kind of can't understand
Yeah.
really why she's been kept in the dark by her mother.
No.
She's just, during the play, she's kind of getting to know her mother, even though she's now grown up. She's in her 20s.
Yes.
And
But it is also about parting of mother-daughter. Diane Samuels says in one of her books that it is, in the end, also a story about separation of mothers and daughters and how difficult it all is.
And last character, Helga.
And Helga, oh, of course.
oh, Helga, yes.
Helga's the mother. Starts off very cheerful.
Well,
but
she's
she's
giving
preparing.
she's preparing her daughter to go off to this other
yes.
place.
So
and
she's trying
saying-
to be cheerful.
And saying how, well, you've got to learn to do things
Yes,
for yourself.
Yes.
And I'm not always, she's kind of subtly saying, I'm not going to be there to be helping you all the
That's
time.
right, that's right. Which, of course, Evelyn never forgets that she
And
feels
she-
abandoned by her mother.
She
much
kind of
later.
misinterprets it as her mother having rejected
Yes,
her and
yes.
not supporting
Yeah.
her.
But I think, as you said earlier, the play, it has all these universal themes and very particular issues that it's dealing with from the 1930s.
Yes.
But it also brings out the more intimate difficulties that we all have
Exactly.
as
Yeah.
parents, as
Exactly.
children, and
Exactly.
as we
Yeah.
grow up and have children.
Yes.
When we observe others who have children, you
Yes.
see how we felt, and you understand the
Yeah.
resentments that go on.
Yeah.
But obviously, this is
Yeah.
a much more extreme
Yeah.
version.
Yeah.
So it does seem to draw everybody
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
And she said, Diane Samuels said, she realised when she was, her own son was going off to university. And Faith comes in and says, well, I don't want your teak set, I want mugs. And her son, and she said her son was very much the same, but she realised, well, he's actually leaving home and how
Yeah.
difficult that is.
Yeah.
Completely different dynamic.
Yeah, and the difference between this is how it should work. You know,
Yes.
your child grows
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
and naturally
Does
leaves
need
home and
to
you prepared it, and
leave,
then
yes.
and this play illustrates a sort of
Yes.
rupture when someone is forced to leave home
Yes.
before they're ready,
Yes.
and then the
Yes.
impact that has
Yes. Yes.
sort of through the
Yes.
generations.
Yes.
So you know, and that's the thing. It's a generational trauma. You sort of see it in a lot of families who've refugees or survivors. It's like that trauma doesn't end with the person experiencing it. It is
Yes.
transmitted down generations.
Yes.
It has
Yes.
a long term impact, and
Yeah.
you can see it in the play. The impact. It's you know.
And you can relate it back to the Raj orphans who came way back in the early 20th century. And then the refugees who are coming and the way people are sending their the children over as refugees
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Today, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
today.
People, parents having to make the same
Yeah.
choices. Do
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do I save my child by sending them
Yeah.
away from me? And the
Yes.
child will always say, I want to stay with my parents, and the parent will be like, I have to send you away for your
Yeah.
future. And so again, that
Yeah.
split in what the child wants versus what the parent thinks is going to be the best for them long
Yeah.
term. You know?
And the trauma those children have got to go
Yes.
through
Yes.
making their way.
Yes.
And and there's
Yeah.
you know, unaccompanied child refugees still today.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
There's a chap in Lord Dubbs who's been very active in talking about refugee children today came as a Kindertransport child himself, so he knows what he's talking about when he's talking about the House of Lords. Why it's important, because he went through it himself.
Yeah. So these are all very, very important themes. So it sounds like it is a play we must see, but it's fascinating and informative, a period of history that we all think we know.
Yes.
And so it'll be a wonderful experience for everybody. Okay, thank you so much. That was really, really good, really interesting. Thank you.
That was great fun.
Kindertransport runs from the 21st to the 25th of February in the studio, so do go to putneyartstheatre.org.uk for tickets as soon as you can. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app and recommend to all your friends. See you next time.